Today I want to explain something that I've noticed on the internet. I've noticed this when I've been doing research recently. I've been doing quite a lot of research into evolution, and I like to listen to both sides of the debate. I like to listen to people that believe in evolution, and I like to listen to people that don't believe in evolution. Obviously, I've been using a lot of YouTube and listening to a lot of people speak on YouTube about it, and both sides of the arguments. And I've been doing a bit of reading about it as well, but I've been mainly listening to people talk about it on YouTube, like, experts, like, biologists and evolutionists and scientists, and all these people express their opinions on what they believe about evolution. And I've been listening to both sides of the debate. I've been listening to the evidence that suggests that evolution is real, and I've been listening to the evidence that suggests that evolution isn't necessarily real. And it's an interesting debate. But before I start, I just want to start by looking at some Bible verses. I'm going to start by looking at a Bible verse. I know that this might seem a bit random to some people, but obviously the Bible, people who believe in the Bible, a lot of Christians don't believe in evolution because they claim that the Bible claims that evolution isn't real, that we was created by God. Now, obviously, the scientists and many atheists are way too intelligent to believe that, at least in their own minds, they're too intelligent to believe that. And obviously, they cannot possibly be wrong. Evolution is pretty much a fact, according to some people. And anybody that tries to say it isn't is a bit of a nut job. They're not fully... they're not very intelligent. They must be a little bit intellectually challenged to believe anything else other than what these people are saying. And I hate that mentality in some people. I'm not saying all scientists or all atheists are like that, but there is definitely a section of science and atheists that, instead of concentrating on what they believe, they like to go around ridiculing what everybody else believes. But let's just Romans chapter 1 verse 22 says, claiming to be wise, they become fools. And I think this is something that everybody has to be careful of. Proverbs chapter 14 verse 15 says, fools will believe anything, but the wise will think about what they do. And then we've got more. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 2 says, a fool takes no pleasure in understanding, but only in expressing his opinion. Now this is so true and so relevant today, it's ridiculous. Considering this is written in a book it's in the book of Proverbs, so it's like 2,000 years old at least, or probably about that sort of age anyway. And amazingly, it's still as relevant today as what it was when it was written, if not probably even more relevant today. But I'm reading these verses because, in my opinion, these verses, whether you believe in the Bible or not, I don't think you can argue against these verses, and I think these verses are very accurately describing a lot of the problems that modern day people have. Like, people like to have their beliefs reinforced instead of challenged. I've never been worried about my beliefs being challenged, because I would rather know the truth than live a lie, sort of thing, live in absolute ignorance. And that's what religion is about, really, isn't it? And science, I suppose, really, they're more alike than what people actually believe, than what most people see, because they're both about trying to understand how we managed to get here and what is actually happening. But anyway, so when it comes to evolution, we've all heard, that the story, we came from a single-celled organism, which, this organism obviously evolved into fish, and then from fish it evolved lungs, and then it walked on the land, and eventually, after millions of years, we end up, after hundreds of millions of years, we end up as we are now, according to evolution. That's pretty much the gist of it. And that might sound totally implausible to a lot of people, that our furthest back ancestors are fish and single-celled organisms, but that is pretty much what evolutionists believe. They believe that we evolved, all of us, every living organism on this planet evolved from one single cell organism. And you look around nature and you see, like, I think wolves and dogs are a classic example of it. Like, you see that there is definitely a big change in the wolf since it's been domesticated, and that is because of adaptability and selective breeding and all this sort of stuff. And obviously it's totally changed a wolf into what we now call modern day dogs. And some of these breeds are obviously very unhealthy, which is interesting, and I'll explain why later if I actually remember. But it's interesting that some of these breeds are so unhealthy, because some people that don't necessarily believe in the official story of evolution claim that for every genetic mutation that we receive, for every new bit of code that is entered into our DNA, code is removed and a new problem will arise. And you look at the dogs and you see the genetic mutations of dogs since they've been domesticated from a wolf, and you see that the wolf is still the perfect dog. You can't improve that's not been improved. It's just been, there's certain breeds of dog that have been bred to have a strong sense of smell, that might have a stronger sense of smell than a wolf, but it's not got the whole package that the wolf has got, because for every bit of code, DNA code and information that has been added to the domesticated dog, there's also been code that has had to be removed to make way for the code to be added. And this is I think this was a scientist called Stephen Meyer who was speaking about this, and it was a very, to me, it was a very interesting argument. And so there's doubt straight away there. Like, nobody can doubt that a wolf has turned into a dog over a pretty very short amount of time, really. But they've not changed into a different species. It's not like the wolf has turned into a different species. It's just the same species with the same DNA, but selectively bred and differently adapted. So I don't think you can argue with that side of it. But what you can argue with is the idea of reptiles turn into mammals or fish turn into mammals, because there is a lot of reasons that you can argue against that. And like, if, for example, if a fish slowly evolved into a mammal, then there should be transitional fossils, and even Charles Darwin admitted this. There should be transitional fossils from start to finish, which means that somewhere in the fossil record you should literally have things like half reptile, half mammal, half insect, half mammal, and you haven't got these things in the fossil record nowhere. And that goes on for all species, because if everything came from one, and it's never actually been observed anyway, but so again, that's a big problem for evolutionists, because the fossil record doesn't back them up. There should be obscene fossils, the in-between fossils of the changes, but that's never been observed and never been seen. So the transitional fossils is evidence against evolution until they're found. You have to say that the evidence isn't there. There must be somewhere, like I say, half mammal, half reptilian, half this, half insect. but there is no fossil record of any such thing. So the transitional fossils, again, seem to prove, or be at least evidence, that evolution is wrong. Evolution as it's described is totally wrong, because these fossils haven't been found, and there should be absolutely crazy fossils that really we couldn't imagine. And but these things have never existed anyway, or at least they've never been found in the fossil record. So that again seems to speak against evolution. And then you've got the Cambrian explosion, and this is the earliest sign of pretty much all complex life came from this one event. After this, life just appeared. There was no fossil record of any life before, of any complex life before this explosion of life. And then all of a sudden, there's just millions, a big diversity of life. But there's nothing leading up to that in the fossil record. Again, it's a hole in the fossil record. When they say the missing link, what they should say really is the missing links, because there is missing links absolutely everywhere in the fossil record, and none of this makes any sense. And the only thing that does make sense is that these transitional fossils never existed, and there is no life, sign of complex life, before the Cambrian explosion. So what does that mean? That means that everything come out at the same time, even according to the scientists and the evolutionists. There was no fossil record leading up to that. It just seemed to happen, as far as I can see at least. And now the most ironic one, and the one that I find the one that really slaps science in the face, really, because obviously as Christians are ridiculed regularly for believing in a virgin birth and a resurrection and all this supernatural stuff that science says is absolutely impossible. But science doesn't actually say that's actually absolutely impossible when it suits science, because even if you say, let's just assume that all evolution is right, we evolved from apes and this, and again, another hole in evolution quickly before I move on, is obviously apes. Our intelligence is so superior to apes. Where did that come from? That's another mystery and another missing piece of the puzzle in evolution. But anyway, so we come from apes. We'll give them all of evolution. We'll say that is definitely real. They haven't proved it, but let's just give it them anyway. They've proved evolution is real. That means everything came from one single-celled organism. Everything evolved from that one creature. That's what they believe. But where did that single-celled organism actually come from? That's the problem. Now they're trying to say that non-living chemicals somehow, non-living, non-conscious, non-intelligent chemicals somehow managed to create life out of nothing. So not only do scientists actually believe in a virgin birth, the virgin birth of the earth, they believe that everything come from nothing other than non-living chemicals is basically, non-living chemicals and time are basically the evolutionist God. That's what they believe is God, because that explains everything to them. That like explains, they use that to explain absolutely everything, and especially time, because everything's like, well, it's taken billions and millions of years, and so it can't really be observed. But anyway, non-living chemicals creating life has never been replicated in any single lab ever. It's never been observed by any single scientist, and yet they still believe it, which is a leap of faith, which is exactly what people that believe in the Bible are taking as well, a leap of faith. And when you start looking at the the fossil record and you look at what these people believe, what evolutionists believe, you start to realise that they're also taking a leap of faith, and it's more of a religion now than most religions. I mean, it's taken over as probably the biggest religion in the world, science and evolution, as despite the fact it actually explains very, very little other than small mutations. You know, there is no sign that any of this has ever happened. The fossil record does not back them up at all. Where's the half chicken, half dinosaurs and all this? Like, do you know what I mean? Where's the giraffe with the neck slowly, you know, the giraffe with the short neck and all this stuff? I mean, where is everything? And they can't explain this, and you know, they'll say, well, this is it, but that, yeah, this turned into this, and this, you know, like humans turned into apes, but where's the middle? There should be a middle. It's not like an ape can give birth to a human. That's never been observed either. And so it is an interesting argument, and I do love looking into it. But this is what I was going to say I've noticed as well on the internet when I've been looking at this. And one thing I've noticed is videos that speak about evolution don't tend to get many dislikes and much hate. You know, even if people don't, obviously Christians must watch videos about evolution. Sometimes I'm a Christian, I've been watching videos about evolution, so you know, they don't get many dislikes usually, if you know. But videos trying to debunk evolution, on the other hand, tend to get, you know, a big dislike bar, a big dislike ratio. And I've noticed this quite a lot, because I use SmartTube now instead of using YouTube to watch YouTube, so I can see the like bars, and it's pretty obvious that the videos that debunk evolution tend to get a lot more hate and a lot more dislikes than the videos that actually talk about, that actually promote the idea of evolution. Now, why is that? Do you know what I mean? Like I said in the Bible verses earlier, you know, claiming to be wise, they become fools. Fools are people that don't listen to both sides of the arguments and just assume. That's a foolish behaviour, and I think that's what's happening with a lot of people and a lot of science and everything at the moment. I mean, to be honest, one thing I've noticed, if you speak to proper top scientists, you know, and evolutionists and stuff, they will admit these problems, and a lot of people don't believe, and even a lot of these top scientists who I've been listening to, I've noticed, don't believe in evolution as it's taught either, because, you know, there's no evidence to suggest that it's true. You need proof. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof, and, you know, there is none. That, like, you know, I think for me, the transitional fossils is probably the best evidence against evolution when you actually start looking at it. But another good piece of evidence against evolution is the eyeball, unbelievably. Because obviously, according to evolution, your eyeball would have had to evolve step by step, you know, slowly adding more and more to it until it is what it is now. But the trouble is, that means, you know, at one step, the eye wouldn't even function. Without every single compartment that's in the eye wouldn't function. So if you take one of them compartments away from the whole eye doesn't function anymore. So that means that things must, according to evolution, things must have had pretty much unfunctionable eyes at the beginning of evolution, and it's taken millions of years to get it to the point where eyes are what they are now, which means, obviously, according to the theory of evolution, you would expect that most animals was walking around nearly blind because the eye wasn't even fully evolved at that stage. So it's interesting, and it's, you know, it's hard to convince people of something that they've been, you know, it's hard to convince people that something's not accurate when that's what they've been taught by everybody they know their whole lives. It becomes an accepted fact, despite the fact that it isn't an accepted fact. You know, like, what is a fact anyway? Most of the time, a fact is just an agreed upon thing, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? That's what too many. I mean, obviously, a proper fact isn't that, but that's what too many so-called facts are today, isn't it? Just agreed upon by a group of people, and it becomes a fact. But yeah, anyway, I might make more about this later. But thanks for watching.